people are calling landlords evil, calling property investment unethical, saying the entire system is rigged to exploit the renter for profit. Now, this is the exact conversation I've already had 100 times. And after years of sitting with it, here's where I've landed. In my view, property investment is not the problem. In fact, I believe it's actually one of the most ethical solutions we've got. Because when you think about it, there are only 4 ways rental housing gets supplied to the market. Either the government does it, foreign investors do it, big corporations do it, or everyday Australians do it. So if you take away the incentive for everyday Australians to invest, you're not actually left with a fairer system. You're left with one of the other 3 options. None of them are going to end well for renters. So is this actually about ethics, or is this more of an older conversation to be had? Socialism versus capitalism. Equal outcomes versus equal opportunity, wearing a new disguise. My name is Corey Jones, and we've helped over hundreds of everyday Aussies build wealth with Australian property over the last 6 years. And today I'm going to break down the real argument behind, is property investment actually unethical? And the alternative is far worse than people realize. So while the effort, the risk and the sacrifice is still a matter in today's fair society. So there's been lots of conversations recently about the ethics around property investment. And like I said, guys, some people are saying right now that it's downright evil. Look at any news article, look at the comments section, and see how many of the population, how many people right now still believe that this nonsense is fact. The idea of a person even being a landlord, just the name of a landlord, creates this dominance over another human. The idea with this is something I've grappled with for many years. After thousands of conversations with people about the pros and cons of renting, here's what I've come up with. Firstly, we have to actually consider what we mean when we say unethical or evil. Because when I think about something that's unethical or evil, straight away I view intent. An intent of ill will towards another. I would actually say with property investment, we're actually doing the opposite. We're investing our money into something designed to make society better, not worse. And like I said before, there are 4 ways that we can provide rental stock to the market. Option number 1 is that the government does that. So with our tax revenue, increasing taxes, the government then has the ability to go and build all these houses that we don't currently have. Remember guys, we tried this before. Think about the Homes West policy. The reason why the government had to stop it, because it was extraordinarily expensive. We weren't making the tax revenue, and there was nowhere near enough tax revenue to not only fund these houses, but then maintain these houses over time. The properties ended up being subpar, and it didn't actually solve the problem. The second option we've got is we incentivize foreign investors. Now, thanks to Labor's new CGT changes, if I was a foreign investor, I would not be putting my money in Australia. Why? Because of the 30% tax that they've now imposed. I'd be putting my money in far more lucrative countries where there is no crazy tax rates. For example, places like the UAE, where a lot of people are moving to now. Option number 3 is we rely on large corporations. So giant funds like BlackRock, Vanguard, who are already sweeping up most of the residential houses throughout America, they can come in here and start sweeping up all of our rental stock as well. Problem is, they end up monopolizing. They end up creating upward pressure on both prices and rents because they're now controlling the supply of houses. Now, option number 4 is what we've been doing over the last couple of years that most people don't realize. We've been incentivizing the everyday Aussie to do this themselves, which happens through things like tax incentives, like through the GST discounts and negative gearing. This is what we're actually talking about, guys. Now, when it comes to the ethics, when people say that property investment is unethical, it's because their intention is seeing that people are doing this for profit rather than helping out a renter with a house. Now, keep in mind, guys, this is how the system works. It's completely legal. It's completely fine. Our current economy means that housing can be traded and profited, right? That's just the way that this works under capitalism. Now, if the argument is that it shouldn't be this way, if you take away the benefit of owning an investment property that you can't profit from, you got to understand no one will actually do it. There has to be an incentive. If there is no incentive, we literally will not do it. Not the government, not foreign investors, not large corporations, not the average Australians. Like, no one will do it if there are no returns. Let's just say it's dreamland. It is never going to happen unless the government takes over and controls everything, and then we're living in a full communist state. And I think it's fair to say most people would realize we probably don't want to be living in a full communist state. Now, let's say we were to wave a magic wand today and just transform into this utopian communist world, right? Hear me out. None of this conversation would matter because there's no such thing as investing. There's no such thing as building wealth. We're all completely subservient to the government anyway. Like, how is that actually a workable solution to create more fairness and equality and freedom for people when they are literally subservient to the government? Look at most other communist countries around the world today. Now, if this is a philosophical question around socialism versus capitalism, public versus private ownership, so the first question I'm going to pose, who gets to have the $5 million home and who gets to have the $300,000 apartment? A communist would tell you it should be based off needs. My question is, well, who gets to decide whose needs are what? The government? Good luck with that. Now, the second point I'd like to make here is the fact that, like I said, there needs to be some form of incentive. Do we want to really understand the fact that when you're investing in property, the reason why you actually get the incentives and you get the returns from that property is because the market actually needs it? hence why we have to incentivize. So in my view, that is a great use of it as an investment. Now, what I'm really saying here, guys, we live in a free market. Now, when I say free market, yes, we do have aspects of socialism. We also have aspects of capitalism. What we call this is a hybrid market, or a hybrid economy. Now, that meaning in our free market capitalist idea, you got to understand the returns themselves are based on the inherent demand. In other words, it's not worth the product or the return. There simply wouldn't be an investment. So if I invest in something that's not needed by the free market doesn't give me returns. In other words, the only reason why property is so lucrative in Australia is because we literally need it. There is literally an inherent demand for it. If there was no demand, there would be no money. This is how the free market is supposed to work. Assets that generate the highest returns, giving you those high returns because there's a high demand for it. There isn't a demand, there would be no profit and no one would invest in it. Now, when you're investing in property, what you are investing in is a fundamental human need: food, water, and shelter. Notice that when you're investing in property, you're investing in shelter. There is a fundamental human need. It is always demanded. Now, if we want to get into the argument and say, but food, water, and shelter should be free for everybody, yeah, fantastic. Notice how food isn't free out there. Go to a restaurant and demand free food because it should be a human right. Notice how they're going to turn you out of there and send you down to the Red Cross. The idea that fundamental human needs should be free just because is kind of naive in today's world. Now, when it comes to, say, for example, tax breaks, people's concern right now is the fact that by giving these investors negative gearing, we're giving them all this free money that could otherwise be used in other purposes to help our society rather than giving it to all these wealthy investors. And they're talking about it as if negative gearing is a tax minimization strategy. It's not. Negative gearing is an outcome of a strategy. It is not a strategy. No sane, sophisticated person would ever go and intentionally run a property at a loss and lose money to then minimize tax. It's like, why the hell would you go and spend $1 just to get 37 cents on the dollar back? It's naive and it just would not happen. The wealthy people do not do this. In fact, wealthy people buy in companies, they buy in trusts where the CGT laws are completely different again, and they cannot use negative gearing. All right, so back to the conversation of inequality. What the hell is inequality? Socialists would tell you equality is equal outcome. Everyone should have the same outcome despite the effort. Capitalists would say the opposite. They would say it's about equal opportunity. Now, let's do a thought experiment. I started this business 6 years ago. Now, in the last 6 years, I've had to dump in over $700,000 of my own equity to make payroll, keep this company afloat. So I've got a debt over $700,000 today. Now, for the first 4 years of running this company, I made zero money. When I say zero, I mean zero. I made nothing. I was living off equity. My family was living off equity. I've also averaged 70-hour weeks since the day that I opened the doors here. Even today, where I've got over 40 staff. Most of my days are 15-hour days, including today. Think about the time that I've put into this business. Think about the energy that I've put into this business. The effort, the risk. Meanwhile, one of my employees who gets employed, they don't really have to have any risk because they're getting a set salary. They don't have to put in any investment. They don't have to put in any equity. There's no money that they've got to start pouring into here to essentially have their job. The entire time they're here, they get a wage or a salary. So they get paid the entire time. For every minute they spend, they get paid for it. Now, with the average 37.5-hour weeks, with their super, leave, all their entitlements, which I've never had as a business owner, by the way, you've got to consider when I'm paying someone's hourly rate, I'm literally buying that person's time in exchange for work. So you're trying to tell me now that by me spending and making those sacrifices over the last 5 years, working my ass off, missing birthdays, delaying gratification, living off meagering for years, just so that I could go and afford to buy my first property, buy my first investment, build a business, that somehow this is now unfair? You're right. This is unfair. This is unequal. Completely. I've put so much more effort, so much more time, so much more energy, so much more risk into having what I've got today than what most people are willing to do. That's what's unfair about this. To sit there and say that property investors are unethical because they've got money and they're winning, particularly in today's market, unfair against the other person who is not willing to make those sacrifices, you're right, guys. It's not fair, and it never will be. There's no such thing as fairness. So that's pretty much I've got for today's conversation, guys. But thank you for tuning into the Motivate Property Podcast. If you've got any questions about the content I've covered today, feel free to drop a comment below. And of course, if you aren't subscribed yet to the channel or follow us on our podcast players, show us some love and do so. It'll help us bring you great content every week. And if you're also looking to get started with property investment as well, use the link, reach out to our team, and we can see how we can help. Thanks for tuning in.